Make no mistake, Justin Jefferson was absolutely worth the money. Here's why. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much to those of you who listen to Locked On Vikings every single day. You are all the backbone of this thing, especially if you're hanging out and listening in June. If you're new here, though, hello and welcome as well. My name is Luke. If you're just trying to get some Justin Jefferson info because you're excited about the news, you have come to the right place. So welcome in. You can find this show Monday through Friday, anywhere you find your favorite podcasts. Just search out Locked On Vikings. That includes YouTube and Amazon Fire and Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So here's what we're going to do today. Arif Hasan is going to join the show. He wrote a piece over at his Substack, Wide Left, about Justin Jefferson's contract, both the value of Jefferson and why he's worth it, but also why the contract is so huge and maybe even bigger than you kind of get the sense for. We go deep on the numbers. It's a good conversation. We'll get into that very shortly. First, a couple of quick points of order that I wanted to mention that are happening now at Mandatory Minicamp, which is opened up. Everybody's there that's supposed to be there. So good to go there. Justin Jefferson showed up and all that stuff. Couple of interesting things. One, Blake Brandel is indeed taking all the first team reps. Dalton Reisner appears to be pretty comfortable and saying, I'm with the twos right now, and that's that. Of course, a lot can change in camp, who knows? But it doesn't seem like it's like an open competition or anything. It seems like it's just Blake Brandel's job and Dalton Reisner's depth. He's making less money than Blake Brandel anyways. He's making like $2 million or something like that with a lot of incentives and stuff in there. And then the second thing is N'Keal Harry is moving to tight end. That was like a story, I guess, or he's been working out with the tight ends. Who knows if that's going to stay or if he's just getting some like blocking coaching, but that probably will stay. Here's the deal. Like Tristan Jackson had leapfrogged him on the depth chart. Brandon Powell and is up there with him on the depth chart. Jalen Naylor up there on the depth chart. Like N'Keal Harry, I don't know if he would make the team at wide receiver. I mean, he didn't last year. So maybe at tight end, maybe you can try to sneak in there in the Nick Muse level of the roster and go be like the fourth guy that's on the team that gets cut once TJ Hawkinson is back. But honestly, I don't know if it makes a team either way, but I do kind of see the vision here. I mean, he can block. Like he had some really cool blocking moments as an inline receiver, which is tight end. So I kind of see the vision. We'll see if it works out. Kevin O'Connell actually did answer a question about TJ Hawkinson and said maybe they're going to put him on IR instead of PUP. That would be, so IR is shorter nowadays, of course, thanks to the COVID rules that they just kept. So it's like a minimum of 3 weeks instead of what it used to be, which is 8. It can still go up to as long as you need to. So it's a lot more flexible. And PUP is not nearly as flexible. So if there is a chance that he could be back, on IR, like before, 6 weeks, putting him in IR would be great. And it's exciting that they're thinking that way instead of going like, well, we'll see if we get him at all this year. And that they're happy with his scheduled recovery and all that. So a couple of quick points, and then we'll go into the Arif Hasan conversation and then an Everyman Series entry afterwards. All right, everybody, here with Arif Hasan under duress. I've brought him to the show to talk a little bit about the Justin Jefferson contract. Arif Hasan of the Wide Left Substack, which I occasionally contribute to as well. Sometimes
been a bit.
Yeah, been a bit. So right after Justin Jefferson signed his big old extension, you published a piece about the value of the contract. And the way that you look at contract value, like just total value in terms of like related to like the salary cap in the year signed, is the way that I've started to look at it too. So for those who are just still looking at like the number 35 million, can you explain what context you would put that in?
Yeah. So the difficulty with the way contract discussions have emerged is that agents also pay attention to the way that the public talks about contracts. So initially we started talking about contracts by their total value. So agents would advertise the total value of their contracts, which means they would negotiate to artificially pump up the total value of the contracts. Well, we got smart about it. So we started talking about it in terms of per year value. So we would take the total value of the contract divided by the number of years in the contract. And it turns out that was the way to advertise how big a contract was. So agents started finding ways to maximize the average value of a contract. And in doing so, they would allow teams to put funny money at the back end of contracts that players wouldn't actually end up seeing. So a really good example that was pointed out by Jason Fitzgerald at Over the Cap is the Tyreek Hill contract. So he ostensibly makes $30 million a year. That led the market in receiver average annual value. And this was signed in 2022. So led the market for several years. Well, it turns out almost all of that money is in the fourth and fifth year of his contract, which has no guarantees, no practical guarantees, not guaranteed for injury, no rolling guarantee that triggers into it. This is money that he will not see. And so over the first 3 years of his contract, what he actually makes is $25 million. That's a lot of money, but it's not the $30 million that we had anticipated. And so when we were talking about the Jefferson contract, we were talking about, well, if that was 30 then, it should probably be 35 now. And it did end up being 35. But the thing is, Jefferson's actually seeing $35 million a year for the first 3 years of his contract. And so 3-year cash flow might be the most accurate way to determine how much a team is valuing a player and how much that player is getting out of a contract. It also kind of more closely maps on to how it impacts team building, which is in cap space. And so those are all of the elements that matter more than the average annual value or the total amount. And one trick is to take a look at the guaranteed total and the guaranteed per year, because that also gives you some sense of how much a team values. But the real value is in the first 3-year cash flow. And then after that, what the cap hit would be. So
would you say you have to look at it in the context of a time horizon?
Yeah, man.
I think Kwesi's always talking about like 2 or 3 years ahead. So like, that may like whatever's happening in 2027 cap wise is just not true, right? It's just like weird.
The Vikings only have 16 players under contract in 2027. That cap number is so fake. So it's
and just half of that is the draft.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just that you don't have those players under contract. Also, whatever cap projection you see for 2027 is wrong. That's an estimate that's like used to kind of have a guess, right?
We have no idea what the cap will actually be at all.
Right. And so the Vikings are projected to have like $227 million in 2027 cap space, which that seems nice, I guess. It's also like 25th in the league, which there's nothing to make of that. Like you can't be like the Vikings have handled it well or poorly. It's not a real amount of money. New players will be signed and some players will be cut.
I think that's just a ranking of like who has done who has signed the most 4-year deals this year. Like
and there are virtually no 4-year deals. I say virtually, there might be none. There are virtually no 4-year deals where the player will see that amount of money in the 4th year of their contract. So
no, unless you're talking like quarterback, like Mahomes stuff.
Yeah, but even then, I mean, like Mahomes restructures his contract every couple of years, right?
Right. So cap hit wise, it won't make sense, which is what we care about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that said, in that context, this is still a top, like by that metric, I think it's still a top 3 contract ever.
For a non-quarterback. Yeah.
For a non-quarterback. Yeah. I'm sorry, for a wide receiver in general.
Yes.
Yeah. Because Tyreek Hill still has a bigger percentage. I don't know what Nick Bosa's is off the top of my head, but yeah.
Yeah. So if we're using the percentage of cap space that the average value takes up. So again, we're using the average value, which is not a super accurate, but more accurate than a lot of methods, I guess. And then we divide it by the cap space at time of signing. We can get an approximation for what the impact of that player is and how much in team values. Tyreek Hill, number 1 at 14.4%. Number 2 is Jerry Rice, the 1996 contract. Fair enough, right? And then number 3 is a tie between Justin Jefferson and DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah.
And then Randy Moss is like right below that. And so when Kwesi said that they value Justin Jefferson as the best non-quarterback in football, he meant it. He put his money where his mouth is, and that's exactly how that came out to be. Good for Justin.
Yeah, and just to make sure that everybody knows, 3-year cash flow includes the entirety of a signing bonus.
Yes.
That's like how much money that player will actually take home, even though the cap hits for that will be deferred like further down into the contract. Yeah, it's interesting. Like a lot of people that don't like what the Vikings did with Justin Jefferson and didn't want him to like pay all that money, are like, you can't pay $35 million to a wide receiver because, and they'll get into weird things about like wide receivers don't help you win the Super Bowl, which that was a YouTube comment I had. Insane take. But it's like that puts him in the air. It's fine.
Having
It's fine.
trouble.
It's just a YouTube comment. It's becoming trouble. But like, today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Gametime. It's the best place to find last-minute tickets. If you are trying to get to any sporting event, whether it is maybe a Twins game or if you're trying to get to an NBA Finals game, tickets on Gametime, you got to check that out there, see if you can't get a good deal. Or even if it's like comedy shows or theater or something else, anything, you can find it on Gametime. Go check it out because you can save up to 60% off, especially if you buy last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. They also have flash deals that will like highlight right at the top of the app where you'll find some like really, really banging deals on tickets. They also have their zone deals where you just choose a section and Gametime can choose the seats. And if you like give Gametime that flexibility, you might be able to save even more money. So go take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. It puts him in that rarefied air. It puts him in the world of, the Vikings see Justin Jefferson and say, yeah, we're going to value you like Randy Moss or Jerry Rice. Like that's where we're at. And I think to say like, well, you shouldn't pay guys like that. You have to start backing into really weird takes. Like, well, the Cardinals shouldn't have had Larry Fitzgerald on their team. Like you have to back into some really weird spots. Like Calvin Johnson, he was nothing. Like these are Hall of Fame players.
Yeah, so Kelvin Johnson. I mean, if you wanted like an example of X player doesn't matter, just find a great player on a bad team and just say that position doesn't matter, right?
Right.
But
quarterbacks don't matter. Dan Marino never won.
There you go. So there's like a couple of problems here. One is that I think that generally speaking, when we use broad analytical tools, we do a very poor job of valuing eliteness. And so when we talk about positional value, or even if we use a much more specific data point, like let's say PFF wins above replacement, which I know a lot of people don't like PFF. I know they don't like wins above replacement. I tend to think of it as a very useful tool. I think at the ends of like the eliteness spectrum, it does a pretty poor job because the best receiver in the NFL is worth like half a win over the course of a season, which by the way, for a non-quarterback, is much better than almost any other position, if not better than any other position. So it's less about a wide receiver is not going to win you anything and more Justin Jefferson's going to win you some stuff. And he has. Like you watch Vikings games and it's like, yeah, they wouldn't have won.
Did we forget? But not with Nick Mullins, unfortunately. He did everything he could have done in that whiteout game, but
But it's like there's like so many games where it's like, yeah, I don't think the Vikings would have won that Bills game if it was just a very good receiver instead of Justin Jefferson. Right.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
What are we talking about?
So let's move into the other part of what you talked about in that wide left piece. This is the part that exploded my brain. Why Jefferson in particular is so valuable, so much more valuable than just like a really good receiver. Why you can't really reconstruct him in the aggregate. And how it comes down to like double teams.
Yeah. So I made a distinction between Justin Jefferson and Tyreek Hill. I put them in the same category, and even that might have been inappropriate, which I'll explain in a second. And people like AJ Brown or Cooper Kupp or whoever, and you pick your favorite top 5 candidate receiver. There's a gap between that first tier and the second tier. And they produce more. Fantastic. Great. They have more yards per out run or whatever metric you want to use. They produce more. But the things that AJ Brown can't do that Justin Jefferson and Tyreek Hill can do is alter the shape of the defense, alter the defensive geometry, control what plays the defense can call and be comfortable calling. And the way Justin Jefferson does it is by dragging coverage over. People talk about wide receivers getting doubled all the time, and I don't think they understand how often that genuinely happens. Like, it
Yeah,
really,
because we're not talking about like the Julio Jones, two guys on the line of scrimmage doubled. Most of
yeah.
the time when it's a double, it's a bracket. It's some kind of safety help over the top, or it's some kind of like
Mhm.
horizontal bracket. It's some kind of, we need to have like somebody inside, somebody outside.
Yeah, exactly. And a double team in the NFL is typically you've got one cornerback on a guy, and then the other guy has eyes, right? And so that bracket might be a vertical bracket. It might be, like you said, a horizontal bracket. It might be that you've got both an inside linebacker and your slot
Yeah.
corner has their eyes, and then one of them takes the bracket based off of the coverage assignments, stuff like that, right?
Yeah, and they might not even end up covering Justin Jefferson depending on the route he
Right.
runs, but it's still the existence of that player lets the underneath guy play it different, which makes his job easier, and it still kind of plays out as a double.
Right, exactly. And so so the way the double teams play out isn't exactly the way that we envision it, but also it happens a lot less often than people seem to think. And so these really great receivers, people like AJ Brown or Cooper Kupp, in 2022. These really great receivers get double teamed maybe like 1 out of every 5 plays. And these are top 5 guys, 1 out of every 5 plays. A phenomenal game-breaking receiver gets doubled 1 out of every 4 plays. There's only one guy that does that, Tyreek Hill. Justin Jefferson gets doubled 1 out of every 3 plays.
It's unreal. Like, that's truly a defense showing up and saying, well, if we can slow down him and we can't do anything else.
Yeah, it is nuts. You go back 2 years, no one's at 33%. It's like 25%. Justin Jefferson's at 33%. Mind you, that's a year, like, it's the 2022 and 2023 data. Justin Jefferson's averaging over 100 yards a game in this data set.
Yeah.
So he's not just getting double teamed on a third of plays. He is effing producing.
Like he's still doing, like, that's not working. It's not enough.
Yeah, they're double teaming him, and he's got like 110 yards a game, right? Like, it's just like he's getting 1,800 yards a season, and they're like, boy, do you want to throw another safety on there? I don't. My data doesn't include triple teams, right? Like
I'll never forget that Lions game where he got like one catch because they had both safeties following him around every single time, like poaching.
Yeah, it's just and so the argument I make here is that Hill to some degree and Jefferson to a clear degree don't just create yards for themselves. Great players produce greatly, right? They produce enormous amounts on their own, and it shows up in the box scores. All timers produce for others. All timers create yards for other people, and so that's why the Vikings, like, halfway through the season, were like, "Oh, we got to get a tight end who can catch because this is nuts how much space we're getting here. We got to do this." So they grabbed TJ Hawkinson, right? And later the Vikings are like, "I don't know that this Adam Thielen thing is working out. We got to get like a receiver. So they grabbed Jordan Addison, right? And they produce, right? And so what Jefferson does is that it's not just that he gets you 1,800 yards, which is an insane sentence, right? Like, he gets 1,800 yards, but now what? Well, he also adds a couple hundred yards to a couple of other receivers. Like, that's crazy town stuff. You can take a look at, like, well, what happens on like contested catches, right? Because we remember like the Justin Jefferson highlights, like, oh wow, those are great contested catches. But what if we look at every single contested catch? Because sometimes the highlights trick us. Well, only one guy has an above 50% rate on contested catches when double teamed. It's our guy. It's Justin Jefferson.
Did you guess that?
Yeah. But yeah, so his success rate when double teamed, like, so you can use like Matt Harmon's reception perception. His success rate is in the 90th percentile, which over 2 years, only one other receiver has done that. It's Stephon Diggs, which, like, there's a nice little bit of synecdoche there. But then,
wow.
but then, yeah, but I probably used it wrong. But then there's also like the only two receivers have also had like a 90 percentile open rate, so success rate in Matt Harmon's reception perception on plays in man coverage, plays versus zone coverage, and plays versus press coverage for 2 consecutive years. Justin Jefferson, and then 2 years prior, Stephon Diggs. It's crazy because like and one thing that I noticed is that there's all these production statistics like wins above replacement, yards per route run, points added through SIS, whatever, open rate from ESPN's Next Gen Stats, whatever. All of these, there's a ton. And Justin Jefferson ranks first or second in every single one. And that would be really cool, except the person that he ranks second to is always different. And so in the aggregate, he ranks first by like a mile. Like it's not close. So like yards per route run, oh, he's second to Tyreek Hill. That's interesting. Points added, oh, he's second to Devontae Adams. That's really cool. Wins above replacement. Oh, he's second to Cooper Kupp. Hey, this is weird. Something's going on.
Yeah, he's the only one that's that high in all of it.
Yeah. So he's the only top 2 receiver in every one of these metrics, and in some of them, he's like top 1.
So that we've basically talked about all of that article. So what else do you have at Wide Left that people should go check out?
So it's not just like a commentary on football, although there's a lot of that there. There's scheme breakdowns. You and Tyler Fornes have contributed to those, and technical breakdowns of players. There's also other analytical breakdowns that talk a lot about, the strengths and weaknesses of various analytics. So you can find that over there. I also talk about the industry a lot. So right now, my pinned piece over at Wide Left is about the intrusion of what we call artificial intelligence into sports writing. The piece that I'm most well known for right now is a deep dive into a company, the Draft Network, and that one
insane. By the way,
I
cannot recommend that piece enough. Set aside half an hour and get ready to have your eyes melt.
There's also some political stuff. The Super Bowl is more political than you think. That kind of piece is up there too. So all kinds of commentary over at Wide Left.
So go check that out if you're interested in some or all of that. Arif, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. If you've been thinking about getting into therapy, and I strongly recommend that you do, I think therapy is something that is for everybody, whether you have something that you really need help dealing with, or if you're just interested in maintaining your mental health, I think it's really smart as a maintenance thing. You can go check out BetterHelp. BetterHelp is there to help you kind of break down that barrier of entry that therapy can have oftentimes. How do I find a therapist? How do I know the therapist is going to be right for me? What if I don't like it? All those questions are asked just by the format of BetterHelp, where not only will they help hook you up with someone they think is right for you, but if you do get matched with a therapist that you don't think is right for you, you can switch at no additional charge. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Moving on with this episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Now we're going to go into the Everyman series, which is a yearly tradition here on the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we go over every single new Viking, from the undrafted free agents to the premier signings from March, first round draft picks, everybody, their backstories and their journeys to the NFL. And today I want to start the story somewhere around, I don't know when this happened. I'm going to have to guess like 2007 maybe, maybe earlier, maybe later. Dallas area. 2 twin boys are playing a particularly rambunctious game of tag, and one of the twins slips and smacks his face on a kitchen stool, and he'll have a scar on his face for the rest of his life. But he's otherwise okay. It's just a superficial scar, and that is the only way that so many people can tell the Murphy twins apart, is because Grayson has a scar, and Gabriel Murphy does not. Gabriel Murphy is the subject of our Everman series entry today. These two are the classic, inseparable twins, which is cool because we've actually been able to tell that story already once with the Griffin twins, with Shaq Griffin. And we're going to tell it again because Aaron Jones is a twin as well. We got a lot of twins on the Vikings. That's got to be blessed, right? So anyways, these two guys are inseparable. There's this great anecdote. One time, one of them goes to a sleepover without the other, and they get grounded over it. These two will not be apart. Once in school, they do the classic twin prank. I think if you're an identical twin and you look identical enough, you just like get to do this where like it's a rite of passage where you switch clothes and see if your teachers notice. Didn't notice at all. And it's like they're like giggling, like are they gonna notice? Teacher doesn't even acknowledge it. Like it's just not even close. And they have all kinds of experiences like this where they are just like attached at the brain. They can read each other's minds. And so when they're playing high school football, that can help because they both play on the defense. Gabriel, of course, plays outside linebacker, which turns into edge rusher. And Grayson plays inside linebacker. They make a pact at some point that they say they're not going to go separate to college. They will not separate at college. They will like a college has to take both of them, which is the same pact that the Griffin twins made when we talked about them as well. So it's the same deal with the Murphys, and they run into a lot of the same problems. For one, it's just hard to find colleges that are interested in the both of you. Maybe they like one but not the other, and if that's the case, they're just off the list. You really narrow your options. But for two, they need to have the same needs. They need to really have like enough scholarships set aside for both their outside linebackers and their inside linebackers. And that's kind of a weird, like rare thing to find. They actually go to a TCU camp, and that's where it's really laid out for them, where a coach says, look, we can take you, but not you. And that's it. You can take this or leave it. And they say, well, shoot, we have to leave it. That was one of the schools that I think seemed to be more interested in them, and even they're not doing it. And on the ride home from there, they kind of make a decision together because the dream was always Power 5 college football together. We want to be on the defense at a big school, playing under the big lights, Saturday nights and the whole thing. We want Power 5 football. And they're crying on the way home because they're realizing they're not going to be able to do this. And so they call up a smaller school, group of 5 that was interested in them in North Texas. It's not the dream, but they're going to be able to stay together. It quickly melts away that they're not at Power 5. And they just are stoked to play together. And they're exciting to play. Like, they're exciting. They get a lot of sacks. They're just a nightmare for quarterbacks. They communicate really, really well. And they just both play really good football. They should be Power 5 players. And it's just that the package deal of it all made it really hard for recruiting to, like, fit that puzzle piece in. So they redshirt their first year, and then their second year they explode. And they start getting calls. Power 5 schools. Suddenly, them as a package deal is like, wait, I got both these guys? It's like suddenly it's an advantage. And they've got calls coming in from everywhere. So they enter the transfer portal. Or that went the other way around. I'm not accusing anybody of improprieties here. They enter the transfer portal and the calls come in like crazy because they know that they can get into Power 5 now. And maybe the closest school that was going to take them that didn't was Penn State. Penn State had a great pitch, and they were actually very excited about Penn State. But this is great. Because one of them ended up in Minnesota, but they're showing them like all the gear you're going to get. You get this shirt and these shorts, and here's your thing. And one of the parts of like the pack of gear is a down jacket that says like Penn State on it. And it reminds them that they're going to be freezing cold. they're Texas boys. So they're like, I don't know about this. And they like go ask somebody else like, hey, how's the food? And someone's like, not really that good. So they say, you know what? No to Penn State. And they heard the food was great at UCLA, so we're going to do that. Fast forwarding to the draft, so neither guy will end up getting drafted, as they're overshadowed a little bit by Laiatu Latu. Gabriel Murphy was probably supposed to get drafted, but he fell out of the draft. You probably remember going, whoa, why'd this guy fall out of the draft? Let's see if we can get him as an undrafted free agent. And then we did. But now they enter this chapter of their lives as twins where they will be separate for the first time. And very far apart from each other because Grayson goes to Miami and Gabriel takes a huge sum of money to play for Minnesota. So they're going to be apart now. And that's going to be the way it is in the pros, right? Like the higher the level, the less choice you get about where you go, especially as you're an undrafted free agent. You're just trying to make a team. And Gabriel Murphy joins a team where maybe he can actually make it. But Grayson is off in Miami and good luck to him as well. So now the twins separate. And it's interesting, listening to the older twin players that have like gone through this part, especially with like Shaquille and Shaquem Griffin going, wow, that was really, really hard. And then they actually did get to play together again. Who knows if the cards will fall the same way for the Murphy brothers, but now Gabriel Murphy is going to have to, for the first time, be his own guy. They were a package deal. They were a pair to the point where like teammates would just stop bothering to call one without the other. It'd just be like, hey, twins, like Murphs, like it would just like, hey, come over here. And now there's a sense of independence, and that's an important experience to grow and to see how he responds to that kind of new thing in his life. We'll see how it goes. A lot of people see him as like a dark horse to make the roster because he's an undrafted free agent. Like enough people have called that where I don't know how dark the horse is anymore. But we'll talk about roster stuff another day. I will see you all tomorrow. We will get to the mailbag. And as always, Skull.